I'm Dean Newland, and welcome to Leadovation. Reimagine, facilitate, flourish. This podcast is dedicated to the art and science of innovative leadership. Through insightful interviews with industry experts, I bring you cutting-edge strategies and experiences of innovative leadership, helping you think differently, act strategically, and achieve remarkable results. Join me as I provide insights and tools that empower you to make smarter decisions, forge meaningful relationships. Welcome to Leadovation.
Let's face it, organizational design isn't sexy, and it's often thought to be stuffy, complicated, and impractical. If you're a wedding planner, however, you design the menus, the type of flowers at the altar, and the kind of music playing in the background. Sexy stuff. And a lot of people want to be event planners. Not so many people, however, are drawn to be organizational designers. And what even is organizational design? Some complicated set of theories you'd find in the Harvard Business Review? And if I don't understand it, feel too stupid to even do it, and it seems unrelated to running the day-to-day of the business, well, I say to hell with organizational design. Now, wait a minute. Before you switch to another podcast, let me say this. Number one, and I'm talking to all of you leaders out there and HR people who are in business. Number one, organizational design has the most significant impact on business results, more so than any other planning activity. And number two, it's a lot easier than you think. My next guest knows all the theory and all the practical experience that she has and decided to write a book that she herself could not find. A practical, straightforward guide to organizational design, and she and I discuss it on today's episode. Susannah Robinson is the president and founder of Partnership for Talent LLC, an independent consulting company focused on supporting small and medium-sized organizations with strategic human resources and organizational design. In her practice, Ms. Robinson takes on leadership roles in companies as the fractional HR leader, spending portions of her time with multiple companies to bring best practices and develop the organization, focusing on creating HR solutions to help drive business objectives. She has more than 20 years of human resource experience, holding a variety of both business and human resource leadership roles for both large global organizations and mid-sized nonprofits. Ms. Robinson is also an adjunct professor for Northeastern University, teaching master's level organizational design. In addition to her degree in chemistry and management from Marietta College and an MBA from Northeastern University, she also has earned an advanced certificate in strategic HR management from Cornell and has an SPHR certification. Susannah Robinson on the Leadovation podcast. So Susannah, great to have you on the show. And I think this is a really important topic, the topic around organizational design. I know you've got a wonderful background in this subject. And in fact, it seems very timely. I was just talking to a CEO recently about their reorganization and their organizational design process. And I kind of noticed something that I wanted to get your thoughts on to kind of get us going into this. That in one hand, people sort of see organizational design as moving the deck chairs around. It's who goes into what position. I've also noticed that we focus more on people than on competencies. And the third thing I've noticed is that we often sort of, when it comes to real organizational design, I'm not even sure we know what that means. I mean, most executives, and they kind of give that off to the HR people, the OD people, and say, well, you tell us what you think, but maybe in the end, we're still going to make the final decision. But in the end, they don't really know what organizational design is. So start us off. Give us a layman's version of what is organizational design beyond just simply creating an org chart.
Sure, absolutely. I agree with you 100%. They love to rearrange the deck chairs. 99% of the time, someone calls me and says, I think I have a problem with my structure, right? And it's usually not. And so it's the reason I wrote the book. It's the reason I called it Beyond the Boxes and Lines, is because to me, organizational design is three things. It is job design, it is structure, and that it is employee practices, all that have to be aligned with the goals and objectives, the strategy, the values of the organization in order to be able to drive your business forward.
And so is this something that, I mean, it sounds easy when you say that. I know it's not that easy, but is it something that people can be taught when they're so focused on the actual, implementation of things? I mean, this is an exercise to me is really getting way out of the weeds and into the big picture. Yes. And seeing the whole versus the micro. I mean, how do you work with people aside from the book and you doing it yourself to teach them to think that way?
I do it in two ways. I try to teach leaders to spend at least some time every week, every month working on their business versus in their business, right?
Okay.
To stop and think about, how could I do it differently? What am I trying to achieve? Do I have the right people? Do I have the right jobs? Is it all flowing the right way? And then the second thing I try to do to make it more consumable and not feel quite so big and overwhelming is every time something changes, right? Someone leaves your organization, you get a new set of customers, you're going after a new market, stop and think about, is there a better way we can do this, right? When I lose the accounts payable clerk, instead of just going and hiring a new accounts payable clerk, stop and say, is there a better way we can do this? And that right there is the org design piece. That is, do I have the right jobs? Do I have the right structure and the right flow and the right handoffs? And then you get someone who's a good coach, whether it's your HR person or a good business person or an actual coach, who, when you put some of these new fancy things like comp practices and feedback loops and things in place, say, okay, is that achieving what you want it to achieve? Or is there a possibility you're veering off into some sort of unintended consequences?
So the person that might be replaced in this one small example you gave could in fact be AI.
Could in fact be AI.
Maybe
Could
we don't need that person
consolidated
anymore.
With somebody else's job.
Right.
Could have the job split up into a bunch of different parts. Absolutely.
How is, if we take a little sidebar conversation on this, AI affecting organizational design practices?
I think it's affecting it in a couple of principal ways. One, I think it's taking a lot of the routine administrative tasks off of the people who leaders want engaged in thinking about things in a more strategic way, right? So HR people will never write a job description the same way again, right? It will always start with AI. You'll just always get the first 90-second pop out and then tweak it instead of spending 3/4 of a day writing a job description. But what that does is that frees them up to then partner better with the business leaders to make sure their organizations and the teams and the people and the practices are doing what they want it to do and actually resulting in business moving forward.
Understood. Yeah, that makes sense. I know that a lot of people are looking towards AI to see if they might be able to make some innovations that before were handled by humans. Our little company is finding huge productivity advancements just by the use of ChatGPT, just one little tool there. I'm an executive. I'm trying to replace a couple of people in my ELT, for example. What sort of advice do you give them so that we just don't continue to hire for loyalty and we start thinking about hiring for competency, which doesn't mean that loyalty isn't important, but how do you get people to move out of that mindset? Like, I'm going to be retiring in 3 years.
Right.
And I got to find a replacement for me. And maybe we need to reorganize my entire department. It seems like most people go to, who do I know and who do I trust? And where is their already proven track record in these people who could take over my role or other people's roles? How do you shift that mindset? And what do you do? How do you go through that with an executive to get them to think differently about that?
I usually I spend a lot of my time asking questions of people, right, as opposed to giving answers. I usually ask questions I already know the answer to, but I ask two questions. One is, what are you trying to achieve? Where do you want to get to? And the other is, what made you successful in this role and what would have made you more successful? Because getting them to talk it through, I then start taking notes on what those competencies are and help them link to those competencies, because they can usually tell you why they were successful. And they weren't successful because they were loyal. They were successful for a variety of competency related reasons. And then they can oftentimes be self-actualized enough to say, and if I had done this or had this, I would have been even more successful.
Got it. So, and then that makes a lot of sense. I like your way of going after that. And how do they then move from what you just said to maybe I don't hire my best friend into the role that I have? I mean, there's a certain amount of bond and loyalty to these relationships that are hard to let go. I mean, is there any other tips and tools you have to bring people to this sort of competency mindset, if you will?
And that's where the org design piece really comes in, right? Is once you get them to outline what are the key competencies in that role, then you can start to say, okay, if I look at the 6 people on your leadership team, what is that job and what are the competencies of those jobs, so that you can start to see where the workflows and the handoffs really are. And then you can start to really identify it in a little more objective way. It will never be perfectly objective, but a little more objective way. Who has those competencies, who doesn't have those competencies, and where you have glaring holes that you might actually need to go out and add to your corral.
Yeah, for sure. It seems like a lot of people address this particular topic episodically. We have somebody who's moving off the team. We have a new competitor in the market. We're moving into a new region, and so we need to do some org design, if you will. What's your thought about working backwards? I think there's even a book to that effect regarding how, I think it's Amazon, approaches org design from a future state perspective, and based on where we're heading, what kind of a design do we need in order to get there? What's your thoughts on that approach?
I believe start with the end in mind, right?
Yeah.
Always start with the end in mind. And so if you can get them to articulate what's the strategic direction, what are the 1-year objectives, right? What are the values of the company? What are the things we need to make sure we're aligned with? That, and you can get them to think more often than just once a year, once every couple of years of working on their business. People start to think about it all the time. Even in my own little firm, I do it all the time, right? Every Friday, I don't take any calls on Fridays, right?
Right.
And so I spend a lot of time thinking about how do I work on my business and knowing where I'm going, knowing where I want to be in 5 years, knowing how we need to get there. What are the skills I need and what do I need people working on? And we shift frequently, right? And so it's sort of like muscle memory, right? And it becomes more change becomes more of an iterative type of thing than these big sweeping changes. And so it feels less like, oh, we're changing all the time, and more like we just keep getting a little better all the time.
It seems to me that we expect a hell of a lot from our leaders. They almost become demigods in our minds. We want them to do so many different things. We want them to be perfect in modeling the values and the behaviors that the company espouses. We want them to be great operators, great strategic thinkers, maybe even great organizational developers. So, for example, is there at some point we simply just say, you know what, you're a fantastic leader. Your competency doesn't need to include organizational design.
Yeah.
Let's give it to the OD department. Let's get Susannah in here, somebody else. Let's not try to put one more thing on an already busy plate. And if you do that, it would seem then you would need to have a tremendous amount of trust in the subject matter expert on the team who can say, this is why we need to make these changes because of my organizational development background. CEO, CFO, COO, all the others trust that. Do you find that happens, or do we still load up these poor C-suite people with skill sets that they may never master and might do rather poorly in trying to do everything they do? Is that a pitch for your work or what?
Exactly. I like to do it as part of the team, right?
Okay.
So I'm not going to ask the commercial guy to restructure the organization, but I am going to ask him to contribute his band of knowledge, right? So that the person who's sort of sitting at the center of the spoke for the org design change is the org design person. However, they're not doing it by themselves, right? They're doing it as part of a team. I always like to say that, I'm a business person at the table. My specialty just happens to be people and org design, right? So I'm going to have a conversation with you about the business, and then I'm going to take the pieces that I'm hearing about the structure and the jobs and the practices, and I'm going to feed it through my functional lens and come out with something that is a bit more functionally higher level than you might as the sales guy.
So again, you're in a sense, you're creating a process for a team to go through org design.
I'm creating a process for a team to contribute to what the future of their organization looks like, right?
Okay.
Or what the present of their organization looks like, as opposed to feeling like they own org design, to feel like this is simply part of managing a business, that it's not this functional activity in and of itself. It's simply part of managing your business day to day.
But who then facilitates that process?
You're whoever's functionally expert in the org design piece. And it doesn't, you don't have to be like a rocket scientist. I mean,
right.
I happen to be a scientist, right? I'm a chemist. I happen to be a scientist, but I'm not like a rocket scientist, certainly. And so, I think that sometimes I watch the corp dev person or the person who leads the strategic process also can facilitate that. Every once in a while, I watch the CEO do it, right? And so sometimes I watch the person who's 3 levels down in the organization who says, look, I'm running the customer service group and it's not functioning the way I want it to function, right? And they may reach out to their HR partner, or they may simply sit and draw it out on the paper themselves and say, okay, I'm not understanding why Rob and Janice and Rebecca aren't functioning the way I want, and start to think about it differently.
Okay. All right, let me throw a scenario at you.
Sure.
Relatively small, very fast growing startup, doing extremely well, nose to the grindstone in terms of making money. They're making money now. It's doing well. They're beginning to expand. They're hiring people hand over foot. They're just growing. Very typical kind of upstart growing business. And so the structure is based on that speed and that ability to turn the sail and to make things work and to expand. But now we got some bumps in the road, and we got growing pains with the supply chain and with customers and the culture, all of these things. And now it becomes really clear that this small company needs to mature its org design. And you're the CEO of this little group. What do you recommend them to do? What's your recipe for creating some good org design into a startup that's getting more mature?
We spend a lot of our time working with startups. I work exclusively with small and medium-sized businesses. I never venture into the big guys, right? I always stick with the little guys because they're a lot of fun, because they're all going through this, right? If they're doing well, they're all going through this. And what ends up happening is the 4 people that started the startup, who loved to be in the kitchen, everyone doing everything, don't love it when it gets to this point, right? Because now you, at some point, have to start to stack your organization a little bit. Everybody in the world can't report to the CEO or the COO. And so I encourage them to start to think about it in buckets, right? Where are the handoffs? So I always give some people this interesting example. If you go out to Google and Google 5 guys playing one piano, you will find a YouTube video of literally 5 guys playing one piano, and they're all standing around playing various parts of the piano. And instantly, the pop song. And then about halfway through the video, they all move, they all shift, and they just keep going, because it's really clear to them what their job is, where it starts and stops, what the handoffs are, right? And so trying to get the CEO of a startup to think about their functions and their buckets, and how you can start to work through where it starts and stops and where it hands off, is usually a huge piece. It does create a lot of growing pains for the organization.
Yeah. So if you were to create a laundry list of things that you would say, this falls under the category of organizational design, what's under that? What would we include? I'm not saying we go through all of it. We take it in pieces. There's different sequences of all these things, but these are the the toolkit of all things relative to org design? What is that?
Job design, so job specifications, right? Organizational charts fit under organizational design. Job matrices, so the compensation matrix and how those levels of job flow out both relative to the market and relative internally. Levels of leadership, where the leadership categories are, flow in there. And then, to be fair, a lot of the practices that underlie it, so compensation and incentive practices, I pull into organizational design, because if you set them up incorrectly, you will drag yourself back to your old design.
What about, this is just a thought here, including in org design, alignment of purpose, individual, team, those with whom we serve, almost like we talk about vision statements, mission statements, but alignment all the way through the organization on that topic. What's your thoughts on that? Is that part of org design?
I think it is. To me, it sits on top of all of the org design. Is whatever design you put in place in totality needs to align with the purpose of the organization, the mission, the values, the strategy, the objectives. There needs to be alignment all the way. Otherwise, people look at what changes you've made or how you're running it, and they're confused, right?
Yeah.
And they're like, I don't understand. And they don't understand usually because it's misaligned. Is you've structured this or you've designed this, but that doesn't align with the values and the purpose we've set of the organization. And now people could become confused.
So now we sort of talked about two sides of the fence in one way. We got this fairly linear, structural, mechanical, mental, if you will, to use sort of the human body analogy, with the emotional, spiritual, purpose side, people side of things. If that's sort of where we're talking about, how would you define what culture is? And do they straddle both sides of that?
I think that culture is typically, it's funny, as I've led organizations and worked with leaders of organizations, I've watched people stand up in front of the room and say, look, guys, I can tell you what the culture I think the organization should have. However, you all sitting in front of me, look to your left and look to your right. That's going to be, you guys get to define the culture, because I can tell you what I think it's going to be, and you can go off and act a whole different way, right? And so if we can create the organization to function in a particular way and have people interact in a particular way and explain how it is aligned with the values of the organization, aligned with the purpose of the organization, you help to drive your culture. You help to sustain your culture and grow it as your organization continues to grow.
So org design then creates many results, but one of which is a culture that we intend to have, or that we espouse to have.
A lot of this is about intention, right? So when I say spend time working on your business versus in your business, that's in being intentional about running your business. A lot of this is about intention.
Right. And you went earlier on, I'm going to bounce back to something you said. You were talking about job design and job descriptions and so forth. I had a guy that I worked with before on a board, and he was talking about the job description being something that didn't stop when the person was hired. So you create a great job description. You spend obviously a lot of time on that. It's sort of like a mini version of an org design, bringing it into the individual level to say, well, this is really what we were looking for. These are the competencies. This is how you're measured in your success. The whole description is there. But what he said is, when that person is hired, we don't just throw that job description away. We actually use it as a reference weekly, monthly, quarterly to go back to that job description and see how well that person is doing. And we talk about their experience relative to the job description. And of course, we make updates to it as things change and their roles may evolve. But have you heard of that? And if so, what's been your feeling? Is that a good practice?
I think I have not heard of it before. I think it's a really interesting practice, because I think that what He says he's trying to get to is what I call sort of alignment or engagement around three key questions, right? Which is, where do I fit? How can I contribute? And where can I go? And if you can answer those questions, you can forget about putting pizza in the break room every Friday, right? You're focused on how is this person engaged in my company and in the role they have and in driving what we want to drive. And it sounds like what he's done is said, okay, I'm going to explain to you where you fit. I'm going to explain to you by continuing to go back to this and measuring it against performance, how you contribute. And then we can continue to have a conversation about where this job is and what your opportunities are as you continue to evolve in the company.
All right. So one other quick question is, so if I'm a leader, manager within an organization, I'm listening to this conversation, I think, okay, this makes sense to me, but are there three things or two things or one thing that I should really remember of everything that you've said so far that would be helpful in terms of my abilities in the area of org design?
I would say two things. One is to be intentional about your decisions about your organization. The other is to always stop and ask yourself, can it work better? Can we do this better?
That's a great point. There's so many examples I'm sure a lot of people have. It's like, why do we keep doing it this way? And we've never stopped back and thought about another way of doing it. You know, it's just, it becomes almost a habit. I find the same thing with meetings too. Why do we keep having the same meeting the same way? Why do we always have the same agenda? Why do we always come into meetings we don't even know why we're here? I mean, we get into these habits.
Yes.
It's a great point.
And,
but I think you've got some great ideas here. So tell people how they can connect with you. I know you've got a book out. Talk a little bit about that. And if somebody says, hey, I'd like to know more, how would they find it? How would they find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do have a book out. It's called Beyond the Boxes and Lines. It's available on Amazon. It's available on our website. Our website is www.partnershipfortalent, all one word, .com. And so people can reach out through the website. They can find me on LinkedIn, Susannah Robinson, and we'd love to have people connect.
So let me ask you a final question. One more final question. Why did you write the book? I mean, people write books for a lot of reasons. What was the burning platform that said, I got to get this out of my system and onto the page? Yeah. What was that about?
I wrote the book for a bizarre reason. So I teach master's level organizational design at Northeastern. The first year I taught with somebody else's material in their textbook. I didn't love it. It was all theoretical. The second year I went on a search for the best organizational design textbook I could find, and I didn't find any I liked. So I went to the class and said, look, I'm going to teach it without a textbook, and you guys at the end are going to tell me whether you liked it or you didn't. So I taught it all semester long without a textbook. And I said, so what'd you think? And they all said, you should go write the book. And I wish I could just carry your lecture notes around with me. So I wrote the book because I couldn't find a textbook that was not super theoretical, that literally got down into the weeds of what do you do in here and why does it matter to my business?
I'm really glad that you said that, because I think a lot of people have org design mindsets that feel untouchable because they are laden with so much HR jargon and theory, and that doesn't seem practical, and how to get my arms around this thing. And I'm glad you said that. It almost reminds me of like Jim Collins, who wrote, Good to Great and all of his stuff. I think he was the professor or a graduate level professor over at University of Colorado, Boulder. What a place to go and work, right? And his grad students were basically his petri dish to be able to come up with all these ideas and theories, and he wrote books on them. I mean, not bad, right? But I think that's a great idea. So aside from the theoretical heaviness of all the books you read before, was there anything else that you felt you didn't find that caused you to write your own book?
It really was the templates and the sort of the very specific examples, because when you read the book, you'll find that they mostly come from the field, right? They mostly come from experience and those types of things. And we say, you know what, you need to write a job description. Here's a good template. Start with this, right? And so what it didn't give you were the day-to-day pieces. I mean, I got my HR certification. I've been in HR for 18 years, right? And I read all the multiple choice questions, and I read all 4 answers. I'm like, well, none of these will work in real life, right? So let me try to pick the best one. But to me, organizational design has always, and some of it, to be fair, has been the OD practitioners have made it feel untouchable and made it feel like this big project that has to take a long time, that's sweeping change in your organization.
Right.
It does not have to be. It does not have to be big sweeping change. It can be little small changes, and it doesn't have to be scary, and everybody can do it. It doesn't, it's kind of like I was watching Ratatouille again with my nephews the other day, right? Everybody can cook. Everybody can do org design. It doesn't have to be that unapproachable.
So you're saying that I haven't read your book yet, but I'm planning on doing so after this conversation. Is there templates? Are there to-dos? Are there things I can read and go and actually implement? Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. So I put templates in it for job matrices. I put templates in it for org structures. I put templates in it for performance assessments and job specs and whole bunches of things that people who, if you run a small business and you don't have somebody to help with that, you can go get it a start.
That's great. That's great. Good for you. That a lot of people need that. I need that. A lot of people that I know need that. That's a very useful tool. Really cool. Well, Susannah, it's been really nice to chat with you, getting to know what I think has been sort of this murky, weird, untouchable thing called org design. You've really made it much more human and much more accessible. So I thank you for that. And I really wish you the best as you continue on your journey here with this information.
Thank you for listening to Leadervation with Dean Newland. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to learn more about Dean or Mission Facilitators Leadership, go to mfileadership.com. That's mfileadership.com, or check the show notes. Reimagine, facilitate, flourish. Transform your leadership success with Leadervation.